All right. Good afternoon. My name is Bradley Flam. I'm the director of Westchester University's Office of Sustainability, and I'm very glad to welcome you to our Sustainability Research and Practice Seminar. I hope that everyone on this call is staying healthy and staying safe as we all adapt to the professional and academic and personal challenges of living under the COVID-19 pandemic. I hope you're all able to stay home and still accomplish the things that you want to accomplish. The Office of Sustainability and Westchester University's Sustainability Council have been adapting to these new conditions by moving a lot of our events online, as we have done with this research seminar. We appreciate your making time to join us today, and we encourage you to tune in next week when our next seminar presentation will be a presentation entitled Westchester University and the Campaign for Fair Trade, made by a student, Kathleen Tobelman, who has been very active in the Fair Trade Universities program. We look forward to her presentation. We also encourage you to follow events that are happening this semester by subscribing to the Office of Sustainability's weekly email bulletin. If you don't already receive it, simply go to the sustainability page at Westchester University's website, and there's a button right there where you can sign up to receive future editions. Having said that, thank you again, and now I would like to turn the metaphorical floor over to Professor Jessica Schedlbauer and Professor Paul Morgan.
Okay, you were auto-tuned there at the end, Brad. I don't know if everybody else heard that, but thank you. It's great to be here. I'm going to get things started here,
Jessica, why don't you?
And then Jessica will jump in and we'll take you through what the event was last evening. If you weren't able to join that, we'll be providing somewhat of an outline. So some of the issues and how they relate to our own lives in Southeast PA and elsewhere. So let's jump in. The event was titled Solve Climate by 2030. And that should raise a few questions, like why 2030 and not 2050 or not 2025 or something, and we'll get into that. It was also billed in Pennsylvania as a power dialogue. And this has some history, and I want to sort of jump into that because there have been efforts really for more than 10 years now to try to generate really student and citizen engagement around climate change. And this is really a testimony to the persistence of people, and that's really what we have to be. This is kind of a story of persistence and tenacity. We have to hang on like a lobster. So the event last night featured really 3 people from across the state, and then it was moderated by Grant Irvin. And I'd like to point out that he's the Chief Resiliency Officer for Pittsburgh. And though we have at Westchester an Office of Sustainability, particularly with the kind of the rise of the pandemic that we're experiencing, I'm pretty sure that the concept of resiliency is going to get a lot more press, because resiliency is really the ability to bounce back from interruptions like this. So we could have a beautiful, sustainable society or building or something, but if it's not resilient, it's not going to last very long. And so being able to think about resiliency is really something that's kind of goes hand in hand with sustainability. It's worth mentioning, right? Did mention the person who organized this is Eben Goodstein, and he was a virtual guest in one of my classes this semester, and some of the students from Honors 3 or 4 will remember that. He was supposed to come in person, but had a back problem. But Eben has been working at this for a long, long time, all the way back, and maybe before, this is sort of what I know about, to 2008, there was a national teach-in, very similar to the one that happened last night, called Focus the Nation. And the point there was, again, to try to address climate change by doing a kind of an all over the country and invite the world seminar, teach-in around the issues to try to generate action. And that was in many ways very, very successful, certainly put Eben Goodstein on the map. And since then, we've had some ups and downs, but that's kind of how it goes. There he was in 2008 with his long tie and less gray hair, just like the rest of us. But it was really a beautiful thing. So that was happening all over the world. Something that happened, sort of after that, once the glow of Focus the Nation wore off, there were events, the one in particular in Pennsylvania called Power Dialogues. And the context for this was, and I'm going to jump ahead here, that was the, the reveal slide, the Green Power Plan that was put out by the Obama administration. And so Pennsylvania's organization, PERC, which is Pennsylvania Environmental Resource Consortium, had an event in Harrisburg on April 4th of 2016 there to talk about implementation of Obama's Green Power Plan. And I went with students, and this was the very first selfie I ever took, which is why it's blurry. But we were at the State Capitol Museum, and it was really a wonderful event to try to learn about the Clean Power Plan and how that was going to play out over the next, at that point, probably 14 years. The plan at the time was to have all the emissions targets met by, yes, 2030. Well, if you've been paying attention for the last few years, you'll also know that, well, that Clean Power Plan was repealed. And so it is no longer in effect. So that makes it all the more necessary that we sort of do something else. And so what happened was there were some dark days and wasn't a whole lot going on. But this is not just a story of what's going on in the United States. Obviously, and we can't have a presentation about climate change without this obligatory nod to Greta Thunberg and others, but people were starting to do things elsewhere. And just as a reminder, there will still be a climate strike, even though we won't be literally on campus later this month. But why solve climate by 2030? The Clean Power Plan is no longer in effect. What's the relevance of 2030? Well, this report came out from the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the global body that aggregates all the science and the data on climate change and puts it together. And their report in late 2018 said, basically, governments around the world must make, and this is the quote, rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society to avoid disastrous levels of global warming. And they gave a date, which is basically 12 years from that point, which makes 2030. And so this has become a really significant date in the climate community because basically we're saying this is what the best science in the world tells us. We have basically the next decade to get this done. And as I like to tell people, we can't wait till 2029 and then do an all-nighter and then thinking we're going to get it done. So we need to get started right away. And it's already kind of behind the game. So that's the significance of 2030. And so to give a kind of a recap then of what this means for Pennsylvania, that was really kind of the point of it. So Eben Goodstein came on and gave his video intro and really had, for me, 3 key takeaways, which was, what we do locally will change the future. We live in Pennsylvania. I don't live in Africa. I don't live in New Jersey. I don't live in Moscow. We live here I live in Westchester, Pennsylvania. So if everybody takes care of what's going on in their home places, the sum total of that can make the difference that we need to make. He also remarked on the incredible progress that's been made in the price of renewables, which have been coming down, the popularity of electric vehicles, all kinds of other things. And significantly said, there's the aspect of justice that we can't forget. It's not going to be a sustainable society, or we're not going to really tackle climate change if we're not doing it in a just way and that we don't have green jobs for all. So that was, to me, kind of the intro. And then sort of concluded by saying, this summer, particularly for students, and the focus really has been here on students, is if you don't have a lot going on, and many of us have found we have a little more free time than we expected, get involved in a political campaign with a candidate whose views match yours on what we need to do about climate change. This is significantly nonpartisan. So you find the people you like, but get involved. That's really kind of the bottom line message here of the whole event. So then they brought on the panelists. Jackie Bonomo, I can't remember which, who's president of Penn Future, which is a statewide environmental organization. Her presentation was really interesting, I thought, because she made it very personal in documenting kind of her personal history, but also the state's history and their interactions with energy. You know, Pennsylvania is known as a coal state, but we're also an oil state. And these are some of the earliest wells out west. And now we're a fracking state. And while this image last night, actually wasn't precisely this one, but a similar image showing kind of where the shale fields are, you might think that has nothing to do with what's going on here in Southeast PA, but we're also, if anybody's been paying attention, there has been lots of constructing the Mariner East pipeline, which is going to be moving gas through our very backyards. So these issues are very local, right? So here's the image. I see this when I don't drive around much anymore, which is a good thing, but I see this all over the place in our region. So thinking, and some of you may not even know, what all these strange kind of behind the curtain projects that have been going on. Well, that's exactly what it is. So Jackie's take-home message was commit to doing something, please, and vote. And if you're not a registered voter, get registered. So good stuff there. So I'm going to pause, take a sip of water. Jessica, do you want to jump in on anything? Right.
I would just briefly,
Good.
I'm just looking at my notes from last night. I feel like a big part of Jackie's message was this whole business of committing to doing something, making sure that it's something that is lifelong. This is not a short-term thing, and that we need to make sure that, pick something that you're really interested in, get engaged. She was also pointing out that the governor's race is going to be next year, and that we need to make sure that we are supporting candidates that are really pro working towards climate solutions. So those were two big take homes for me.
Okay.
Can I just quickly add,
Please.
I took home those messages from her presentation too. She also encouraged the audience to run for office. And in Chester County, we have some examples of some very young elected officials, some of whom became politically active as students and ran for office as students. So I thought that was an important suggestion she had for all of the listeners.
Yeah, great, thank you for adding that. I know when people say run for office, typically they have in their head running for president or senator or state representative or something really big and seemingly out of our reach. But there are lots and lots and lots of local elections, local positions and offices that you can get involved in that are just as important in many ways because they really deal with people's lives on the ground. So we're finding out that now, of course. So. Okay, the next speaker up was Joylette Portlock, who I've seen speak before at Pittsburgh. She's the executive director of Sustainable Pittsburgh, and she tells a great story, kind of her own yard. But her two key messages were, as a scientist, this was like kind of her view is sort of like, duh, of course, humans are not separate from the natural world. But she likes to emphasize this because a lot of our problems have resulted from an attitude and a perspective that says, well, we certainly don't act that way. Modern industrial humans are not acting like we're part of the natural world. We're acting like we're some species from some other place that's just kind of stopping here for the moment. And then a critical one, and I'd like to spend a little time with the group talking about this, because she emphasized that a collective problem requires collective action. And I know for students in one of my classes tomorrow, this is going to be the theme. Talking about what's the relative value of individual actions, like maybe eating a more plant-based diet and riding your bicycle instead of driving, purchasing solar panels, things like that are very personal, as opposed to doing the kinds of things we've been talking about here, which is working on things at levels of policy and a changing leadership, really changing systems. When we talk about something like climate change, which is planetary wide, certainly the efforts we make as individuals are important, but they don't necessarily add up to the change that needs to be made. And so there was a kind of an emphasis. She didn't say that don't do the personal things, but I think she wanted to say this is the kind of challenge that requires collective action. And that means even if we're uncomfortable with that, uncomfortable with politics, uncomfortable with organizing, we need to be addressing it at that level. Otherwise, we're not going to kind of meet the challenge. And so I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on that, but maybe we can do one more key takeaway, which was from her perspective, she's really pointing out that there's an issue of racial equity here too, and we're seeing this disparity in terms of the COVID-19 virus as well, in terms of who's hit hardest. Tends to be people with the fewest resources, tend to be communities of color, and that needs to be brought into the conversation front and center. Otherwise, we're not going to come out the end of this with a whole society. It's going to be pain unequally felt. So love to hear people's comments on, how important are the individual actions we make. Certainly when we think about environmentalist behavior, a lot of people have like a shopping list. Well, I'm going to buy the organic this, and I'm going to buy the right car, and I'm going to buy yada, yada, yada. It's all about sort of consumerism, individual, consumer choices. We tend not to, and perhaps it's a feature of kind of our culture here in the United States, tend not to see things as collective problems. We reduce them to individual moral failings. I bought the wrong shoes. Should have bought the Tom shoes or something. So anyways, anybody else want to jump in on the question of the value, symbolic or otherwise, of individual action?
I have a little bit of a follow-up that's related. Okay. She was also the speaker who was saying that you have to meet people where they're at in terms of delivering news about the climate crisis. And I feel like that's often a really important hook for people. So to engage them in any of these kinds of activities, you start with the small steps and you start with the personal, because I feel like if people don't really understand the implications in their lives and how important their individual decisions can be collectively when scaled up, I think it's a little bit difficult to bring people in and just like bash them over the head with, all of these really challenging problems that we're facing and then say, like, what are you going to do about it?
Really good, great. I think that's a great point. So it's certainly not one or the other, but Jorlette Portlock has a background in climate change communication and science communication. And I think that point of meeting people where they are is really critical. Otherwise, we're not going to get anybody. Nobody's going to be hooked. But seeing it as a continuum, then once you've kind of see the personal, being able to kind of continue on to the collective so that we see the large scale impacts as well. Okay, well, we can come back to these questions. That's and one thing that I sort of delighted that she mentioned was Pale Blue Dot by Carl Sagan. And we can come back to this at the end if people are interested. I have the video queued up. It's like 3 minutes of Carl Sagan kind of reading the words that she quoted. But this is an image, of Earth there, the pale blue dot from afar. And she's trying to put our climate challenges in the context of this image, which is, this is the only place we've got all the disagreements that we have, all the people that we love, all the people that we dislike. It's all happening on that little pale blue dot, in a sunbeam. And so being able to put it in that context urges us to do this in a way that shows some solidarity across the planet. Things may seem far away, but it's all happening right here. So kind of a beautiful big picture kind of insertion there. So the final speaker up in the presentation last evening was Hannah Smith Brubaker, who's the executive director of PASA, which is the Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Agriculture. And I should say that in the United States, Pennsylvania's sustainable agriculture community is probably second only to California's, which is a very big ag state. And I know Brad's very proud of that, being a Californian. But Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Agriculture is a very, very large, vibrant, active organization, and really does a lot of great work. Holds an annual conference each year. Recently, they've been in Lancaster, not surprising. They used to be State College. And Hannah Smith Brubaker has been the executive director for a number of years now, and has done an excellent job. So there's PASA, and if you're interested, this is a great way to get involved in the food system. It's not just for people who are farmers. I've been a regular attendee, and I'm not a farmer. So, but anybody's interested in the food system and the power of agriculture to address climate issues, you'll find something there worthwhile. So her message was kind of really important, I would say, because while often we're looking at policy issues, she's saying one of the key strategies for addressing climate change is making sure we have lots of living plants and living soil because they sequester carbon. And there are practices that we can use, agricultural practices, that can significantly enhance, you know, the planet's ability to do what it does really well, which is, you know, take carbon out of the atmosphere and put it in woody matter and things. I'm going to turn this over to Jessica because I know she knows much more about this than I do, but I'd love to have her riff on some of the issues such as conservation tillage and animal integration and importance of roots and diversity and carbon cycling. So Jessica, you want to take it away?
Sure. So I don't know everybody that's here, but one of the things that I feel is often lost from our conversations about climate change and climate change mitigation is thinking about how we actually manage our agricultural soils. And there's actually a follow-on issue that's related to land use change. It's a little bit separate, but we could talk about that later. But when you're thinking about things like agriculture, the way that conventional industrial agriculture is practiced in places like the United States, it's been enormously detrimental in terms of like depleting nutrient reserves and contributing to soil erosion and mobilizing a huge amount of carbon that had previously been stabilized in the soil and releasing that into the atmosphere. And so what was pointed out in the presentation last night is that there are a diversity of different practices to better manage soils that are going to lead to a whole bunch of the positive outcomes that some of them which are indicated up here. And so I really she made a point about how like you may have this endpoint of increasing soil carbon storage, but there are a bunch of different ways that people can get there. And so this list of practices and products are some of the things that people who are managing agricultural soils can be thinking about. So for instance, conservation-minded tillage or no-till agriculture. You know, if you, for instance, are growing corn and you leave your crop residue on the site and then plant corn into that the next year without clearing off the corn stalks, that does things like increase the amount of moisture that the soil holds, increase nutrient recycling within the soil, it stabilizes the soil and prevents erosion, and like all of those things contribute to increased carbon storage on land, which is something that we care really tremendously about, because I think the number is something like 12% of the Earth's land surface area is used in agricultural production right now. Like that's a really, really big number.
Huge. Great. So that was kind of the outline of the presentation last evening, and I know we have time to open it up for questions here. And I know one that was posed to Joylette Porlock, which I sort of indicated in different form earlier, was, you know, how are we going to address our climate challenges by 2030? And thinking about, you know, where we are here in Pennsylvania and most of us in Southeast PA, what's the relative value of pursuing a top-down solution, you know, making changes at the top, and a bottom-up solution, doing kind of citizen action, organizing the grassroots level, literally and figuratively. So those are some of the issues, and I'd love to throw it open to people now if you want to address some of the things that were mentioned there, or take it off in productive tangents. It's all fair game, I think. So we can keep an eye on.
Yeah, thank you, Paul and Jessica, for getting us started. We are happy to have any of the participants on this webinar unmute themselves, introduce themselves, and pose a question or make a comment. Or alternatively, if you prefer to send a question or comment by the chat box, as a couple of people already have, we're happy to have you do that as well. So why don't we have a moment or two of awkward silence to see if anyone wants to just jump in. We'll continue the three of us.
I saw there were some good comments there from Zach D and Simon. So if you folks want to go public, we'd delighted to have you do that.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll jump in with sort of a big picture comment about the webinar last night. We don't know if everybody on the call attended the webinar last night, but Paul, thank you. Paul and Jessica, thank you for giving a good summary of the key takeaways that came out of the conversation. It was inspiring to hear from these three speakers, and there was some good Q&A afterwards that highlighted some of the key issues. I walked away after the webinar ended feeling that we had done a good job at the big picture of getting involved politically, of putting some trust in science and the policies that scientists are recommending based upon the challenge that we understand the climate crisis to be. So we were encouraged to think collectively, to get involved politically, to think about the role of agriculture in addressing carbon emissions. We didn't dig a lot into specific policies. Evan Goodstein at the beginning mentioned the significant reductions in costs of solar and wind over the past decade or so, and the opportunities that that opens up. But we didn't really get a lot into the policy side. So I think in some ways we were successful at thinking about the big picture, but didn't get into the weeds, and the weeds are fairly important at this point. So I'm wondering if Jessica and Paul, you had any thoughts about that as you listened to and then thought about the messages that came out of the webinar last night.
One, two, three, shoot.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm late.
Well, let me just say this quick. I know from the policy perspective, I guess there are a number of things. At the national level, certainly people who are following climate change policy are concerned that we not allow the United States to fully and completely pull out of the Paris Agreement. And that will happen if things don't change, if you know what I mean, the day after the fall election. And so it's really consequential who ends up in the White House, because we'll either, as a result of that, be part of the global community or we will not. And that seems to me a significant thing. Locally, it's significant that a lot of towns, institutions, businesses have said, you know, we're going to stay in the agreement regardless of what happens at the federal level. And so we'll do our best at the local level in our own kind of spheres and our own areas of jurisdiction to do what we've, you know, the climate agreement asks us to do. So regardless of what happens in the fall election, there's going to be a lot of work to do. And some of that's going to be, like I said, at the international, national level. Some of it's going to make sure that we do lots of things at local levels and, you know, in our municipalities to do things that are going to be kind of climate friendly. Specifically what that is, it's going to depend on our places. But people like even Goodstein would say a lot of this comes down to making sure that the market signals for renewables are there so that everybody's encouraged to do that, because we need to change our energy systems. He was using the example of Florida and Georgia. Florida needs to do what Georgia is doing, and basically at the state level in Georgia to making it much more possible to do that. So looking at those kinds of things is really going to be critical, but that's what I got.
I'm going to take that and run in a slightly different direction because I just spent a bunch of time compiling cost information for one of my classes about alternative energy sources. And it's remarkable even how much the cost has come down over the course of the last 10 years, making so many of the options that are out there viable alternatives to fossil fuels. And so in the context of the information that was presented last night, we're living in a state that's like deeply entrenched in the fossil fuel industry. And that history, I think, is something that's going to be really difficult for us to overcome here. And one of the speakers pointed out that the fossil fuel industry is also intertwined with our political system, given the number of campaign contributions that are happening and the way that the government is giving subsidies to fossil fuel companies to further develop in the country, et cetera. There's a bunch of examples there. But it was also pointed out that, despite the fact that we're in the middle of this terrible pandemic right now, there is going to be a whole lot of stimulus money sloshing around, and a lot of that money is going to go towards businesses. And if through public pressure we could help direct those funds towards the development of alternative energy sources and the creation of jobs in that sector, that could actually be a pretty tremendous opportunity at the moment. That could, I know that we're in a bad point, but if we could use this crisis point as a pivot point, I think that's a really important thing to be thinking about.
Yeah, just to pick up on that again, I know there are lots of folks who are been thinking about this and want to make sure that the stimulus, and it's huge amounts of money, as we know, is also, simultaneously promoting things that are going to help us address what is kind of the next, some say, train coming down the track. And it's a very big one, which is climate change. And it may not, kind of hit us in the face like the pandemic has, but it's not going away. And so being able to plan for that, particularly while we're spending the money now, would seem to be the wisest thing we could do. And there are some folks, and I found some things online that are circulating kind of policy proposals around this kind of stuff. So that's out there and worth looking at.
And if I can jump in for just a moment, as I was thinking about the encouragement to us by the speakers to get involved politically, to identify candidates who share our concern and interest in addressing the climate crisis, I started thinking very locally about some of the initiatives happening within Westchester Borough and within Chester County. Certainly students, faculty, staff, community members in the Westchester area can get involved in political campaigns for borough council, for township councils, for county commissioners. But it's not just about elections. A lot of good work happens between elections and don't require one to be an elected official to have an impact on policy. So right now, Westchester Borough and most of the communities that are part of the Westchester Council of Governments are working very actively to identify the policies that will help them achieve the Ready for 100 commitment, which is a commitment to procure all purchased electricity from renewable sources by 2035, and to have all energy sources be renewable within 10 or 15 years after that. There's a lot of work happening right now, and citizens, students, residents can get involved in those efforts at the moment without having to wait for an election and a campaign to get involved in. There are also a lot of local organizations. Some of them are part of what's called the Westchester Green Team. Some of them are part of the Chester County Environment Alliance. All of them are working on different topics. A group called Don't Spray Me focuses very intentionally on the issue of preventing the spraying of chemicals to control mosquitoes in the borough and in the other townships. But that's part of this bigger picture of looking at environmental sustainability in the region, and it's an opportunity to get involved right now. I know that there are people on this call who are very interested in land preservation and conservation of wild and scenic areas. That too is the part of this overall effort to respond to the climate crisis. So I appreciated the message of engagement that came out of the webinar, and then taking that commitment, that interest in being engaged to local organizations, I think is a really good start that we should think about taking.
Great. Looks like some great comments in the chat. If anybody wants to join in there, Zach, Simon, if you've got
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. I had a few things to add. I wanted to first introduce myself. My name's Simon. I'm part of Dr. Morgan's 314 class. But I was not able to attend the webinar last night, but a lot of the stuff that you guys have brought up has really interested me. I come from a business marketing and economics background. So talking about the solution top down or bottom up, I see that as a relationship between the different I guess agencies that govern our society, and going back to consumerism starting in the 50s and 60s, when people started to regain the money to spend after the Great Depression. That same thing is what caused businesses to change how they operated, looking to produce quickly, produce low prices and large quantities. And that same thing came from the consumers themselves changing. So my belief would be that this is a bottom-up solution that we could come to, in the fact that if companies and the government continue to see a push or an interest from the citizens looking for a greener future, a more sustainable future, that they themselves will be almost forced to change or adapt to that, much like they were forced to change and adopt business ethics that are responsible and moral because people started to form unions and create issues about this. So I do believe it is a bottom-up solution. And honestly, I was just reading The Guardian from just 100 companies causing 71% of global emissions. So there is so much that we can do ourselves, but there's also so much that we have to impact ourselves, because we can't affect that 71% of the pollutions that are created by these 100 companies globally. So yeah, I guess just to overall sum that up, I do believe it's bottom up, and that we do have a greater impact on government and companies than we choose to utilize. And that's something that's going to have to change in the next decade if we are to reach that 2030 deadline.
Great. Anybody else like to pick up on that? It was a rich commentary, Simon. Thank you.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm Zach Davis. I finally got my mic set up and everything, so I'm happy about that. Basically, picking up on what Simon said, I think that particularly for us as honor students, we right now we're learning to be leaders. And what I think that means, since we have this essentially 10-year deadline, is that we might need to become leaders sooner than maybe in the past, people have in the past. And by doing that, we might be able to make these changes that are necessary in our everyday lives, and then in the lives of our families and the lives of our friends, and just become leaders, even though we are at a young age and even though we're still learning. But that's really what's going to help us make a difference in the end.
That's great. I love the commentary on leadership, because I think when people think about leadership, it's not always being the president of something. It means acting in a way that is kind of signaling future directions. It's that leadership. It can be prophetic if, in a way. It's like, and it can be very kind of humble in some ways. And so we don't have to have some overblown notion of being in charge of lots of people to be a leader. So, and that's what, people like, the youth climate movement has been demonstrating, is that young people, just through acts of kind of conviction, have become leaders. And that's been really inspiring, of course. So thank you for that.
Could I ask a question that's probably based more in ignorance than maybe the rest of you? I feel like, I read a lot, but maybe I don't know as much as a lot of you. Can you be more specific about what we can do to help direction the stimulus money? Like Jessica, you had mentioned that, it's floating out there. What can I do? Like, should we be getting estimates on solar panels? Like what specifically are you talking about, referring to?
I'm thinking about individuals applying pressure on local governments and state governments to help determine where those contracts get awarded. And so I think you said this in the comments, like the whole writing letters business. Yeah, call your local representatives, call your state representatives, tell them that this is something that you value and that you think that this is an amazing opportunity to help pivot in a more sustainable direction. Those are the kinds of things that immediately come to mind, because if they're not hearing it from us, I feel like the money is going to trickle through to the players that usually get the money, and it's not what I want to happen anyway.
Can I just jump in and say that those stimulus dollars can prove to have long enduring impacts. After the 2008 economic crisis, a lot of stimulus dollars went into the economy. And one of the outcomes of that is Westchester University's commitment to and use of geo-exchange systems for heating and cooling almost half of our building space. We as an institution, Westchester University, were able to move quickly to convert from coal-powered steam heating of many of our buildings to using geothermal or geo-exchange systems, which is much more energy efficient, much lower in carbon impacts. And part of the reason we were able to do that is because there were stimulus dollars available, and there was a strong interest from the university community to make a change like this. If Westchester Borough, if East Goshen Township, if Chester County elected officials and decision makers know that these types of investments are priorities for the people who live and work in those communities, then they're much more likely to prioritize projects that are going to help us make progress on reducing carbon emissions.
Yeah, as I think about this, I got sort of two thoughts in my head. One, listening to what Simon was saying about the importance of kind of the consumer or the citizen in making those choices and kind of taking responsibility for the power that we do have, and we do have power. It's not good enough to say, well, I'm just a single person, I can't do anything, because we do have that power. And oftentimes people are not awakened, and to be an awakened citizen is kind of what we need now. At the same time, when we're talking about trillions of dollars, we need to be able to make sure at this rare opportunity, because it's going to come and go quickly, and that's not going to happen anytime again soon. And so I'm really crystallizing in my mind the importance of doing that and thinking about how we can kind of present an organized response to this in a way. How should that money be spent? What should be the priorities? How can we create a sustainable green economy at the same time that we're making sure we're taking care of people who have been hit hardest by sudden loss of jobs and things? I think we can do that. We can walk and chew gum and do both of those things at the same time. So I'd love to be able to see that. And, maybe kind of a follow-on to this would be, ways to kind of make that happen, to kind of really get in. So that's a way for individuals to get involved too. So
There's a follow-up question. I'm sorry, I don't know your name because you're up here as KSM, but she's saying, I usually write to Senators Toomey and Casey. Should I keep
yeah,
that up? Seems like there's a little point, look more local. I would argue that there's still a role, like a really important role, in engaging with your state legislator, like your state reps and your state Congress people, like that are in DC, because they're the people that are actually involved in writing the legislation that like then farms the money out to the states for these different initiatives, like these different stimulus projects. And if there's the potential to include language in any of that stimulus legislation to direct those funds in more sustainable directions, I think that that is still a valuable thing to be doing. It's just a slightly different message, right?
and this is an opportunity to talk about how a big piece of sustainability is resiliency, and that what the pandemic has kind of shown us is that we've got work to do as a nation, as communities, to build our resilience so that we can withstand shocks like this. And shocks in the future are going to be, climate related, sea level, extreme heat, all kinds of things like that. And so this may be a time to kind of broaden our pitch when we talk about sustainability, that it also includes resiliency, because people who are concerned now about, the pandemic, this is a resiliency question, and that's a key feature of sustainability. That's how we can kind of make those linkages so that they're not really separate. There's a whole literature out there now on connecting kind of sustainability and the pandemic. And if you'll bear with me, there's that. Here, can you see all these articulating connections between coronavirus crisis and sustainability? So lots out there on that. And this is going to be new areas of study, I'm sure, as this plays out. Okay, Simon, farewell. Thanks for those questions, Kate.
We are almost at 12:50, and this is the time we generally officially end the Sustainability Research and Practice Seminar. Some of you may have a class to prepare for at 1 o'clock. Some of you may have other responsibilities. Jessica and Paul, if you're available for another few minutes and there are any additional questions, I hope you can stay on. But for those of you who do have to log off, I just wanted to say thank you for participating today. Please log in next Wednesday at the same time for a presentation by Kathleen Tobelman on Westchester University and the Campaign for Fair Trade. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Paul. And thanks to all of you for participating.
All right.